Hello, everybody, and good afternoon. We are here at the Crime Prevention Association of Michigan, day one of the 2022 conference, and our second presenters this afternoon, both Terry Bykirk
Yep.
and Michael Wieringa. I always want to make sure we get those last names pronounced right. Are from 0 to 60 Career Survival and Emotional Wellness. This is our second session today. One of the most important. We've had two sessions today talking about what we do in law enforcement in our jobs, but then what do we take home? And this presentation that they provided for us today really provided some insight from their perspective of the training that they've done, the outreach that they've done, and how important it is for us to make sure that our young officers, as well as old, right?
Absolutely.
We don't want to leave anybody out, as well as our administration understand how important it is for this type of information and workshops to be presented to our officers, emergency service personnel, everybody who responds to a 911 call, because they're all going to be impacted the same way. This is important. So, Terry, you started the session off here with talking about the importance of why young officers need to be able to understand the dynamics of dealing with these life threatening situations and what it does for them.
Yeah, well, one of the things we started this program was at Grand Valley State University's Police Academy many years ago. And the whole conversation started with what can we do to better educate brand new recruits? What can we do to give them some tools to understand this roller coaster ride, the highs and lows? And that's really where the program started. My background has been with a lot of peer support training and creating peer support teams, and I've been doing that for many years. And so that background came with Terry's personal story to combine that into how important it is to get this education to the recruits and their family members, so they understand what this career is going to be like. And that's really where it started.
Yeah, so and some of the things that you talked about the heavy badge, and you explain to us what that means when you say heavy badge.
Well, we talk a lot about putting the badge on on a chest is like putting it on a lifestyle. It changes, and you go through that lifestyle change of the highs and the lows, and we don't spend a lot of time on that component of the how powerful that adrenaline could be, and it does start to change a lifestyle habit, and a lot of times at work we're rock stars. We go out and do what we're trained to do, but when we get home, we're a different human being, and that's a lot of times where the impact of who gets the brunt of that is oftentimes our loved one, our support structure.
So this is important as we talk about the impact on our wives and our children when we have a stressful day. What happens when we come home and we don't leave it at the door? It rolls in with us. How do you build up on that interaction within to how do you do that buffer? What's important tips on what officers and what command staff need to recognize with young officers if they're struggling after we have a traumatic incident?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is to understand that it affects everybody differently. I mean, you can have a 25 member department or a 500 member department, and you're going to have 25 different reactions or 500 different reactions. And no matter how that looks, that's an area we're not very well educated in. We don't understand that. So it's very common to point fingers. Well, you were on that scene. It wasn't that big a deal. It didn't bother you, but then why is it bothering me? And to have those discussions and understand how important that is from the command structure all the way to your frontline people is huge. And then another component that people that will see that are in our personal life. When we go back home, they're seeing that difference in that person. So that's where a lot of that education comes from.
So when we look at these typical type of things we're seeing from emergency response, and you talked about this, Terry, with your personal experience, the impact on your family, your relationships with your wife and children. How important is it for the individuals involved to recognize I need some help? And I know that we're tough guys. We're all A-type personalities in this line of work. What's the most important things that you've seen based on your experience with? And first, share with us how this is important for you.
Well, I think the first thing that's important is the education on the awareness part of it. Many of us don't have an idea of what the warning signs of suicide or post traumatic stress are, or just where the job is getting you. Because when you go do the job, your personality changes that job. You take on abnormal responses, you take on very shut off emotions, and we refer to it as you shut a light switch off to go do the job. You have to do that. Then the exposures that you get along with adrenaline trauma, and then the problem is that keeps you alive in the job, but then it's hard to come back into your personal life and flip the switch to go into what's normal. So now you're living a dichotomy or so, or opposite of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The important part is a lot of us over the years didn't recognize that. That's just normal. That's just how part of it. Divorce is part of being an emergency responder. Drinking is part of being an emergency responder. And some of people can get through that, but the job shouldn't destroy anything. The importance is recognition. Importance is awareness on not just you as a responder, but whatever that support system, mom, dad, brother, sister, girlfriend, husband, wife. Otherwise, it will destroy something. It maybe destroy a relationship with a loved one, or it will affect your children's ability to come up to you without being worried about your reactions. So I lived it wrong. I did the job wrong. I had a great job, but well, my personal life was a mess. Mike brings all the education component, and I bring how if you do know this stuff, you can change it around, and I can go in and start a new relationship and recreate that of the loss of my children, which I did after doing it the wrong way.
And you both mentioned this about the relationships with your wives and your children, as well as the people you work with that didn't recognize anything going on or have turned kind of a blind eye. It's like, okay, I'll let them deal with it. How important is it that our peers look out for us?
Well, it's huge. It's a must-have. I mean, we do amazing things for complete strangers. We will run out into these communities and do things for people we don't know. We're experts at that.
Mm-hmm.
But we struggle when it's one of our own. We don't know what to say. We don't know how to have those difficult conversations. And when we do, we're terrified to hear what they're going to say to us because we act like we don't know what to do, but yet we do it so well to the community every single day and night.
Yeah.
We've got to change that mindset. That culture's got to change it. We got people right next to us that also struggle, and we need to help them through some difficult times.
Yeah, and if I could piggyback on that, statistics from the mental health wellness experts will tell you, we as police officers, we as responders, the first people we want to reach out to is our support system outside of the job. So family members, if we have the right. The second spot that we want to reach out to is our peers, our working peers. After that becomes your clinical professionals and your health. That brings you to another level of help. But that's how we need to reach. So we have to get the education on the level down below with our families, the responders, and then our peers. Once we get that, the best spent money for any organization, in my opinion, because I've gone through the full gamut of a peers support program where it started wrong and it ended up great.
Yeah.
The best money you could spend is developing a peer support team on your team. It's rather inexpensive, but the benefits you get if you get the right people on the program and you have the backing of the organization is unbelievable.
How important is it for administrative buy-in to bring these kinds of issues and in services to the departments, both police, fire, EMS? How important is it at the top that they buy into how important this is for their workers?
Well, it's extremely important. I mean, it's we're at a point now where it's a must-have. I mean, we're getting to the point where we're realizing the impact of suicide for first responders and the conversations that we're having with how high some of these numbers are around the country. The post-traumatic stresses, we're learning more and more about that for first responders. That you have to have something in place today. I mean, there's some information out there that are we at a point if it's a failed to train issue because we know how important this stuff is, but what are we doing with it from an organization? And you almost need it at a recruit level, a FTO level, a supervisor level, so they understand the front line. But you've got to have the command structure to understand the importance of what's happening there too. And it affects everybody differently in between. I mean, it could be a detective unit issue that's not somebody in the front lines, but the investigations of child porn or some of these other things that they're doing that is so unique to them. So that is a whole other element. But if you have your whole support structure from top to bottom to understand the importance and realize it affects everybody differently. And that's where a lot of times those finger pointing is. It wasn't that big a deal. It wasn't that big of an investigation. It wasn't that big of a call for service. So why is he or she struggling with it? Mm-hmm. And that's where we spend a lot of time on why that happens.
Now, and you talked about, as an FTO, the impact of something that happened to one of your former personnel that you worked with. How important was it for you? And you still say that you're still struggling with.
Yeah, they get some guilt attached because we weren't educated in this areas that aren't really nice to know areas. They're need to know for what we do. This profession is stiffer than any other profession out there, and no organizations send me out there to do that job untrained. I'm very well trained with that, but we have no training or knowledge in a couple areas that make it difficult to go into your personal lives. And one of them is adrenaline. There is a lot of classes on post-traumatic stress and suicide out there, but very few are talking about adrenaline. And that's important for everyday emergency responders because not every emergency responder out there will get exposed to a big incident, the big trauma instance. But every emergency responder on a daily basis, every time you go to shift, will get some adrenaline exposure. And that is what begins the negative. It's proven that if we can have a better lifestyle management habits when we walk out of this place on a daily basis versus just shutting it down and pretending it didn't happen, that when we do get exposed to the big incidents, post-traumatic stress, the critical incident, that the intensity from that is less. So it's more manageable. But as an FTO, it was always just to get them trained for the job, but it was never to do what to manage the job once you leave out, because that's what you have to do.
Yeah, and I heard both of you talk about the critical incidents, or critical stress incidents that occur. We all have had critical incident debriefings, but it's the prior to, so that you know what to expect, because it's a plethora of different things
Right.
that could go wrong, and they usually do go wrong very fast.
Yep.
Very fast, because the day of, hey, the police officers are here. It's great. We'll have them here, but it's like moment go confrontation. It's like, no, we're here to help, but all of a sudden we're the bad guy, and it's like you don't, that de-escalation point of like, let's bring this down when they're already at 10. You got to kind of match it and try to bring it back down, and sometimes the challenge just goes on because the people who called 911 for your help are now angry at you for coming to help.
Yeah.
Yeah, what you have to piggyback on that is how you treat those people. Is it just based on the job, but based on how your relationships outside of here as well? If you're having a rough time at home and you're going through a divorce or separation, your patience level in the job is going to affect that perception of what you do at your job. You're going to be a little shorter with people here, so it affects the job. Remember this, foundation for building anything is the key. And in my opinion, the law enforcement, police, and emergency responders, we've always had a good foundation for the job, but the foundation on what we do with what we've just been exposed to on a daily basis has not been there when we go into our personal life. And we have to change that up.
Now, one of the things too that I want to touch on, because both of you talked about this, and the impact of self-medication and the stress of the job, the warning signs. You talked about the warning signs. You were impacted by the warning signs that you had to live through. How important is it for our directors and chiefs of police and command staff to recognize when we've got an officer or a firefighter who is struggling, and then find ways to get them help? What are some of those warning signs that our young officers and those who are involved in these incidents, what should we be looking for?
Sure. Well, and I think one of the things we talk about that on the slide when we start losing control, how that snowball rolls down the hill. Generally, oftentimes it starts out as something that's very small, whether it's a call that you've been exposed to or something in your personal life. But as that snowball rolls down the hill, we know for a fact if we've got a first responder who's going through a divorce or a relationship issue, and if they're drinking, the red flag is whipping in the wind. They're high risk for suicide. But what are we doing about it? We keep talking about that. We keep saying those are the signs and symptoms. But when we truly see a brother or sister struggling, we need to start reaching out to them. Don't wait for them to come to us. We need to go to them and start having some of those difficult conversations.
And in your case, was there pushback when people saw that you were struggling, or
You have to understand there's been a difference in time, because back then we didn't know any of this. We weren't even talking about suicide. We weren't talking about any of the stuff that we talk about, the adrenaline is. So when I was rolling downhill and hit the rock bottom, there was nobody in my organization that reached out to me. And I don't blame them for that, because the mindset of the organization wasn't anything about that. We hadn't been educated in this. The mindset of the organization was, like I said earlier, cops drink, cops get divorced. So to the organization as a whole, and to everybody inside the circles of the organization as a police officer, that just seemed like a normal event there. But now it should be different, because there's every day and everything. You go on social media, there's something about post-traumatic stress. There's something about wellness every single day. So an organization that's still living by the old school, hey, that's what we do, or my people don't need this, we're squared away, they're out of touch. And that's unacceptable as a leader, as an organization in this day and age. As Mike touched on, it could be a failed train issue down the road, but shouldn't even have to get to that point. I mean, it's not anything.
I guarantee there's somebody in your organization right now struggling. Guaranteed. I guarantee it. And what are we doing to have those very difficult conversations? And that's the challenge. That's why we have the conversations that we do in this program.
And the message that has to get out is, whatever you're going through is making you feel, walk away with this. That is normal for what you're going through. It feels abnormal only because of what your career is, that you have to shut all those normal responses down to do the job, otherwise you can't do the job. So what you're going through is normal.
And I think one of the things too that we've seen, people are afraid to come forward because then I'm going to be labeled.
Absolutely.
I may lose my job. They're going to take things away from me, or I'm going to be put in this little box, and all of a sudden I won't be eligible for a promotion because I'm not a tough guy. I've asked for help. How do you address that when you're talking to our directors and our leadership who has to find these avenues to not only maintain a solid workforce, but a healthy workforce?
But we have to have those resources in place. You have to have them right now in place. So when that officer comes to you or comes to a supervisor and say, "I need some help," or "I'm struggling with drinking," or "I've got some post-traumatic stress reactions," or whatever's going on, when they ask for help, we got to be prepared to handle that. And historically, we haven't. So people are terrified to ask for help because then they're going to end up being put on that island or be by themselves. Where Terry and I both can say we have worked with people from around the state doing the career survival program on people who have gotten help and gotten professional help through their organization, been prepared for it. They may have seen a professional and they're still doing the job. They're still doing the job on the front lines. But we also have the stories on the other end of it where they didn't, or they were terrified to get that help. And then 2, 6, 8, 10, 15 years goes by where they're now diagnosed with something in their life that they can no longer do this job. And we have to be prepared on the front end. People are if they're going to reach out to you and ask you for help, we better be ready for it. We better be able to have everything in line to be able to point them in the right direction. Get them the professional help that they need and get them back to work. We've got people that we've worked with that went through some times, they got the help they needed, and they finished their career as a first responder and went into retirement extremely healthy.
That's important. Because as you were sharing with the relationships and how many marriages you've gone through and repairing, both of you repairing relationships with your children, because when you got home after a tough day, it was like, I got to check out. To hear the story, I'm forcing myself, I've got to go to these games, I've got to be there for my children. And that's something that a lot of times the first thing the guys want to do is, I'm going straight to the bar. I'm going straight to somewhere to go drown this before I get home. And before that, by the time they get home, everything's already done. And it's
Absolutely.
like you get that look when they walk in the door. It's like, where have you been?
Yeah, and if I could just say this about the program we offer is it's different than most other programs. A lot of your wellness programs are going to be are brought in by a PhD, a psychologist, a psychiatrist who's never done the job. Now, I'm not saying they don't have a place. They definitely do have a place. But what our program is, you've got somebody who has the skills with the SISM and the wellness stuff. You have somebody who's made all the mistakes as a frontline responder. And honestly, amongst a lot of times the powers that be up top, they want to have somebody with the letters behind their name to get the program. But what do your frontline people want? They want to hear it from the frontline police officer, both who has the skills, both has knowledge, and who has the mistakes made. And I think that carries a lot more weight than some of the things.
So Terry and Mike, I truly, from the bottom of my heart, I appreciate your presentation today. And on behalf of the Crime Prevention Association of Michigan, we thank you for your commitment to sharing your life stories, because these are real stories. They're not just something that's made up or you've done. This is what you've lived and what you've walked. And for all of our chiefs of police and administrative personnel who are going to see this video, we want to encourage you. We're going to have the information about how to reach their program, and the QR code that will be in the video as well will take you directly to their website. Content information and everything about how you can reach them will be in this video. My name is Rich Coleman. I'm the host for the Crime Prevention Association of Michigan blog. I work for Pittsfield Township's Department of Public Safety, and we are so excited about today's program and more that will come. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you,
once
sir.
again.
Appreciate all you do.
Thank you, Rich. Appreciate all you do.
Thanks so much. We'll see everybody.